pointed out, we now have our keynote speech from Australia. Indeed, it's Stephen Freeland, Emeritus Professor at Western Sydney University, Professorial Fellow at Bond University. Hopefully you are there joining us from Australia.
Hello, Lisa. Yes, can you hear me?
We can indeed. Lovely.
I'm here and it is 20 past midnight. So I wish you well from Australia, and thank you so much for giving me the opportunity, together with my co-moderator in the UN discussions, Mistzal, to update you on where we are and perhaps set the scene, I believe, for the more specific discussions of this eminent panel that we have. I have some PowerPoint slides. Hopefully somebody can put them on and I can test out my clicker. Oh, that's great. And now the interesting thing will be to see whether it works. Yes, look at that. That is fantastic. Well, anyway, my job here, I think, between Andre and I, we have 20 minutes for me to set the scene of all of the conversations that are going on that are all directed around the regulatory framework. I'm not going to focus on data sharing. I'm going to focus on the conversations and setting the scene, and with a particular focus on the multilateral phase of that. But the point to be made is that all of the conversations at the civil society level, at the industry level, at the national level, at bilateral levels, and of course, all of those conversations are relevant inputs with important observations and important suggested initiatives that will inform our multilateral process. And so I congratulate all of those people on the panel who are engaged in these activities and many others. So let me move on and talk about the various conversations that are going on. And I'll do that very briefly, given the relatively short period of time that I have. So you're all aware, and Matthias, hello to you. It's lovely to see you again. Mentioned already the multilateral discussions that have been going on for quite some years at Legal Subcommittee at COPOS. There's a single agenda item that has looked at the exploration, exploitation and utilization of space resources for some years. We've had many exchanges of views, not necessarily all coinciding in the way that they view this issue, but a rich exchange of views. And then in 2019, Legal Subcommittee established what are called scheduled informal discussions. I'll talk a bit more about that, dealing with this at the multilateral level. And as I mentioned, I have the honour, together with Andre, of being co-moderator of that. So those discussions are going on. But as Matthias also mentioned, there are many, many discussions, conversations, initiatives going on at the national level. Of course, Matthias made reference to your national law, and we have other national law in other countries, notably, of course, the 2015 United States legislation and the more recent UAE legislation that deals in more specificity with the issue and the regulation of potential exploitation activities. I won't go into the detail there about some of the niceties of that, but I have no doubt some of the other speakers will deal with it. We've, of course, more recently had a lot of initiatives coming out of the United States, culminating in October with the publication of the Artemis Accords, and my dear friend Gabriel, who you'll hear from, was intimately involved with that. And we've had, I think, 9 other countries engage in bilateral relationships with NASA on looking at regulatory frameworks, or at least behavioural norms about lunar governance generally and celestial body governance. And then, of course, there are all those initiatives, other ambitions of many other countries regarding the whole issue. And we've seen some extraordinary missions by many countries that deal with it. So those conversations are going on actively. And then, of course, as Matthias also mentioned, there's a lot of work being done at civil society level. You'll hear from some of those people, my good friend Giuseppe from the Moon Village Association. You'll hear from Davila talking about the Hague Working Group. There have been other initiatives, all again, putting forward ideas, suggestions, commentaries that will feed into the multilateral process, so that the multilateral process doesn't start from a clean slate. It starts with a lot of really interesting perspectives that hopefully will allow the member states of COPOS to engage and reach consensus ultimately in the way forward. And of course, there I've got at the bottom of that slide industry, because the industry is, of course, crucial to these conversations. All stakeholders are crucial. So let me briefly talk about the scheduled informal discussions. I won't go into all of the formalities, but ultimately in 2019, COPOS decided not at that time to support some suggestions for the establishment of a working group, which is the main modality to move forward on these big issues in COPOS, but instead to establish scheduled informal discussions. You'll see there on the screen that Andre and I were appointed as co-moderators, and the aim there is to have an open discussion on this point, in particular to look at the possibility, if member states so wish, of establishing a working group. Obviously, any working group would have a clear mandate, a clear mode of operation, etc. In the period since the scheduled informal consultations were established to be held during the legal subcommittee meetings, initially, of course, last year, but we're all aware that that was not possible, and so those formal consultations will be held in the forthcoming legal subcommittee. But in the meantime, there's been a lot that we've been engaged with. We've circulated, as COPOS asked us to do, a draft plan to all the member states in September 2019, with a lot of ideas for member states then to react and comment on. We've received written feedback formally from 14 member states. Our plan was to have our summary of that written feedback circulated formally through UNUSA, but with the changes in legal subcommittee, that has not yet been possible. However, we have continued with a lot of other discussions with many other delegations and with various groups, and of course, ongoing discussions with civil society about a whole range of issues that may or may not be relevant in the end, but certainly allow us to aggregate all of these ideas. And then our plan is to circulate whatever is possible prior to legal subcommittee, so that the time that is allocated for us, and that no doubt will unfortunately be truncated given the hybrid nature of legal subcommittee, but at least they will be informed discussions in the fact that every state has had the opportunity to contribute. Every state will see what contributions have been made, and we will take it from there. Obviously, the focal point for the discussions is whether or not member states feel it appropriate at this stage for a working group to be established. My dear friend Andre will talk to that in more detail. The last point I want to leave you with is we've been very, very conscious that this is a delicate issue. There are views that, as I said, are not all coincident in terms of how they view the way forward. And therefore, it's important in every respect that this conversation at the multilateral level, being fed, as I say, by all the other initiatives from all the other conversations, but that the multilateral discussions are open, inclusive, and allow for a broad range of perspectives to be put forward, with a view that, in the end, it's only in that way that the most appropriate progression can be undertaken by the community of states in a way that will allow progress to take place in an appropriate way. So I'll stop there and with your indulgence, pass to Andre Mistzal, my co-moderator and dear friend, who can elaborate on some of the points I've made. And of course, notwithstanding the time, I'm happy to be available for questions at the end of this presentation, at the end of Andre's presentation, or at the Q&A at the end in an hour and a half's time. Thank you so much for your attention. Thank you again for inviting me to speak, and I look forward to hearing all of the panel conversations. Thank you, and Andre, if I may pass to you.
I have a fundamental question. Do you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you so much. And just to say to others, if you could introduce yourself as well. You've been semi-introduced by Stephen there, and it's great that he could throw to you. So yes, absolutely. From the Ministry of Foreign Affairs Ambassador, Republic of Poland. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Matthias. Thank you, Davile, for this excellent idea to organize this week, and thank you for your invitation. In fact, I was also chair of the legal subcommittee at the time it was decided to hold these scheduled informal consultations. If I may supplement what Stephen has said, just wanted to say, maybe not in a diplomatic way, that last year was real disappointment from the point of view of the discussion on space resources, because we faced the cancellation of the 59th session of the ECOPIOS Legal Subcommittee at the point when it was really ready to go. And the situation caught us really in the final stages of preparations. We were conducting talks with the United Nations Office for Outer Space Affairs on putting the results of the consultations online. We were scheduling agenda items, including the meetings within the scheduled informal consultations. But due to the pandemic, during almost the rest of the year, we had to redirect our efforts to the rescheduling of the remaining sessions. And when it was impossible to do so, we concentrated our efforts to ensure that the agenda be carried through on the basis of the appropriate United Nations General Assembly resolution to 2021. So we were not able yet to give some shape to the consultations themselves. The modalities of a format that we call scheduled informal consultations or discussions, which was first developed in the 90s and applied only once, have been analyzed and proposed by the Secretariat in such a way that these scheduled informals on space resources are an integral part of the plenary. This was also explained at the appropriate moment during the session of the legal subcommittee and was reflected in the report from 2019. So the subcommittee agreed that the aim of these consultations will be to ensure a broad and inclusive dialogue on the future format, including on the possible establishment of the working group under the relevant agenda item. In order to achieve this goal, we must bear in mind that the time allocated to these scheduled informals should be used in an efficient way. The draft plan, which was prepared by us, is a general tool and has indicative character. It contains the whole range of issues, but it doesn't mean they all have to be discussed. It is intended rather to signal to all the delegations that the co-moderators are open to an all-inclusive and transparent debate on all relevant issues. We had a rather long experience already in discussing space resources in the COPUOS. Inter alia, within the agenda item, general exchange of views on potential legal models for activities in the outer space, and the establishment, including establishment of the working group. During all these deliberations, states formulated many views concerning possible frameworks, as it was also the case outside the legal subcommittee, and on that, Stephen has elaborated a little bit. So there is a lot of possibilities to contribute to the multilateral approach, and we hope that within the scheduled informals, all of this work, including outside the legal subcommittee, could be taken into account. In order to use efficiently our time, it is our intention to invite the delegations to focus on the most important issue, which is for us the establishment of the working group, rather than on discussing all the legal elements. As states agreed and expressed through the decision of the COPUOS, and it was said on many occasions, the COPIOS, including its legal subcommittee, has a unique ability as the appropriate forum for developing a regulatory framework that meets the interests of all states. And we should seize this opportunity to foster dialogue among all the delegations. Particularly, it is really important that we use this dialogue to develop a common understanding of the responsibilities of states to ensure that any future framework is consistent with the Outer Space Treaty. The main purpose of these consultations is to have a genuine dialogue that is really inclusive and comprehensive. The discussions on the issue of space resources, as the debates in the legal subcommittee showed, are delicate. So the main aim is to try to find a balance between different views that have been expressed until now. We are confident that when we look at the issue in a general way, we may be not that far from the common thought about how to move things forward. And the main objective of the consultations will be to establish a working group to deal with the issue of space resources with a clear mandate, scope, and time limits. I'm not saying that the task is easy, especially taking into account that we want to have at least a general picture of what and how we want to achieve as a result of the working group. But we have to make this step in order to achieve a common understanding of the framework or format in which the norms or rules or other types of things will be expressed. And flexibility and openness to the extent possible, taking into account the position of states, should be, as always, the spirit of this exercise. In the meantime, we believe it is necessary to understand the mandate given by the legal subcommittee in a very flexible way. And that is why we are using the time that we have before the session of the legal subcommittee quite effectively to contact delegations and to talk to them. And we hope that more countries will be ready to share their views with us on the issue of the plan and the session itself. And as it follows from the observation of the states, the focus should be on the future framework and not on the legal position of states. Behind what it is proposed and what we do, there is our conviction that due to the nature of space activities, there is a significant expectation for coordination within the United Nations of relevant actions, including legislative activity, in order to agree a comprehensive, reliable, and enduring scheme of international standards, as there is and will be a need for a coordinated response to the legal questions that are posed in the context of the exploration and exploitation of space resources. That is why we think the multilateral approach is so needed in order to address all these issues and provide the international community as a whole with contextual elements for moving forward. We believe that all approaches have to contribute to the attainment of the comprehensive and universal set of norms and or principles without prejudice to the final result. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much indeed. If you can turn down the volume on your end. Wonderful. Yes, then we won't have the echo. Super. Now, for anyone listening, anyone in the room as well, if you've got questions, there is a panel discussion with all of our speakers, which will be chaired by Dovile after everybody has had their time to speak. So please continue to send in your messages. We'll try to monitor them, the questions via the chat for any of our speakers on this topic.